All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the Medicaid forecast. Allison Taylor, you're up.
Do I have to push a button? Can you remind me? Do I have to push a button? Can you remind me? Okay. Oh, thank you. Good morning, committee members. Thank you so much. Allison Taylor, Director of the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning. We are here to present the December 2022 Medicaid forecast. I have just a couple framing remarks, and then I will let my counterpart Rob walk us through the slide deck that's before you. Notable with this forecast, we are, let's see how many times I can say the word forecast. We are forecasting or anticipating, expecting the public health emergency to end in April. So you'll see some of the, return to normal operations within this Medicaid forecast. You will see impacts to enrollment and spend. Rob will talk through those. Just a quick comment or framing of the issue. I currently serve as the president of the National Association of Medicaid Directors and can confirm that PHE, an impact on Medicaid, has been the top line of Medicaid directors across the country and a major area of focus and collaboration for the association. The experience here very much consistent. We are not alone. This is sort of a national result of public health emergency and maintenance of effort. So just wanted to kind of provide that framing. We do have a couple of I would call them preventative or positive programming in line that I think puts us in a good position moving forward. A couple of things you'll see in the forecast. You'll see the beginning of our Managed Long-Term Services and Supports program, and that's the program that provides comprehensive care coordination for aging Hoosiers so they can get the right care at the right place at the right time. So better outcomes there. We're also going to see, or you will see that we have over the last year and a half really invested in our home and community-based workforce, providing almost $300 million in our HCBS spend plan funds to those providers. And then on the topic of reimbursement, certainly we're really excited to transition to a rate matrix process that is still in the works, but really close to being complete, where we will publish a schedule where we identify the providers that are up for their rate review process, and we'll evaluate methodology. And the good thing there is that will be kind of a regular cycle that we can all understand and predict, and I think will help us very much in this space. So we started with HCBS providers. That is first in line, and the results of that methodology work will hopefully be available in very early 2023. So we're really close. And then those results will be presented to the governor in the governor's budget. So a lot in the works here, but would like to hand it over to Rob. Just a quick note, I know this is Rob's last year. He is retiring. He's been our consulting actuary for almost 20 years. So Rob, just wanted to maybe recognize you real quickly, but then hand it over. And if you don't mind walking us through.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Allison, and good morning, committee members. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Robert Damler. I'm a principal and consulting actuary with a local actuarial firm, Milliman. I'm a member of the American Academy of Actuaries and am meet the qualification standards to present the information that is shown in this forecast. So in this forecast, this is our first forecast that we'll be presenting through the next biennium, so fiscal years 24 and 25. We'll provide you some updates to information that you saw at the last December forecast and how things have evolved since then. Two of the primary discussion items that we'll have, obviously the public health emergency. A year ago, we thought it was going to end in January of 2022, and so that impacts our forecast, versus now we're projecting it to end in April of 2023. In addition to that, one of the things that we're working on through this presentation, you'll see dollar values that are shifting in 24 and 25. Just as a reminder, our budget forecasts are on a cash basis, so there are cash timing issues and how we negotiate our contracts with the managed care plans, cash timing payment issues, approval from federal oversight from CMS. They need to approve our capitation rates, and then processing those through the payment system all takes time. So there are some timing issues that move values that are incurred or contracted into future time periods on a cash basis. So we do have a lot of cash timing variations that do influence the information. I believe all of you should have a copy of the presentation here. I'm not going to speak directly to any specific number, but just kind of walk through a high level of the presentation. As indicated previously, the top three lines are our three Medicaid managed care programs. The Healthy Indiana Plan provides coverage for parents and childless adults as well as some pregnant women in there. So that's our Healthy Indiana Plan program. That program is projected to be approximately $6 billion per year on a state and federal basis. Our Hoosier Care Connect program is the program for individuals with disabilities who do not have Medicare coverage as well. So those are our non-dual disabled individuals that have been enrolled in a managed care program at about $1.5 to $1.6 billion per year. Our Hoosier HealthWise program primarily covers our children and our CHIP population, so Medicaid children and CHIP, as well as some pregnant women are also in the Hoosier HealthWise program, and that has grown to about $2.6, $2.7 billion per year. So those three programs alone account for about $9 to $10 billion of our total $18 billion program on a state and federal basis. So those are our three primary Medicaid managed care programs that we contract with third-party vendors to provide care, coverage and care. The next line item is the MLTSS program. That's the managed care for long-term services and supports. That will include both institutional care and non-institutional home and community-based services. That begins in the first quarter of calendar year 2024. So it will impact fiscal year 24, but just on a partial year basis. So again, the population that's going to be covered under this population are individuals over the age of 60 who are either aged or disabled. It will include those who are in an institutional setting like a nursing home or in a home and community-based setting as well. So it is individuals that are over the age of 60 that primarily are dual eligibles in the aged and the disabled population categories. That program will be approximately $4 billion per year, as shown in 2025 during the full ramp up of the payment process. Fee-for-service program, this covers many of our individuals who are currently dual eligible, who are not enrolled in managed care, as well as those receiving retroactive eligibility, and some other populations that are not covered through the managed care programs. The next two lines are the long-term care, institutional care, and community care. As you can see, we're transitioning from a program that in 2023 is about $4 billion between those two programs to decreasing to just over $2 billion in 2025. Again, we're moving money from those fee-for-service lines up into the MLTSS program, so the Managed Long-Term Services and Supports program. So you'll see a decrease in expenditures there and an increase in the line up above. The Medicare buy-in and clawback, we provide the premium payments for individuals who are eligible for Medicare. Their Medicare Part B premium rates are paid. They're about $160, $170 per month. Those are for anyone who's Medicare buy-in. And then since 2006, when the Medicare program expanded to Part D program to cover prescription drugs, states have had what's referred to as a clawback payment, which is state-only funds. They are not federally matched, but it's state-only funding to help offset the Medicare Part D program cost for individuals who previously were on Medicaid as dual eligibles, and the states were covering the prescription drug costs. But when Medicare Part D came into play, those individuals now receive it through the Medicare program. So states are supporting that program through these clawback payments. The next line items are, the next two line items are recoveries, the rebates and collections. That's primarily the prescription drug rebates. Those rebates account for about 50% of the dollars that are spent. So up above in the managed care programs, Healthy Indiana Plan, Hoosier Care Connect, and Hoosier HealthWise, we have prescription drug spending. For every dollar that we spend for prescription drugs, we receive back about 50 cents for every dollar from the pharmacy rebate program, the National Drug Rebate Program. So most of that line item for rebates and collections really is for the pharmacy rebates, as well as third-party liability collections. There are two programs that are included up above that are not part of the Medicaid General Fund Assistance line item. Those are the CHIP programs, which is separately funded, and the Medicaid, the Money Follows the Person program for the elderly. Then finally, we have other expenditures, which include the disproportionate share hospital payments, the upper payment limit, and other items that are included there. Our total program costs are projected to grow by about 7.6% into 2024 and 1.2% into 2025. Those again are state and federal funds projections. Our funding source is the lower half, with the federal funds being our primary source of funding. Currently, we receive approximately 65% federal match rate for our programs. So for every dollar we spend, we receive 65 cents from the federal government. During the public health emergency, we also receive an extra 6.2%. So it increases the 65% match rate to approximately 71.2% match rate. With the PHE ending in April of 2023, if it does end in April of 2023, that extra 6.2% will be paid through June 30th of 2023, and then it will end with the public health emergency on June 30th of 2023. So that does impact our federal funds. We have several other sources of funding, including intergovernmental transfers, provider tax receipts, the HAF funding, the HIP 2.0 funding, and then we have a transfer of the quality assessment fee transferred to the state budget agency. So our non-Medicaid assistance funds account for about $15 billion and growing to about $15.3 billion in 24 and 25. For net forecasted Medicaid general fund assistance need in 24 of $3.5 billion and $3.7 billion in 2025. We are projecting a decrease in the requested need for fiscal year 2023. You can see that we have a projected need of $2.375 billion, and the general fund appropriation was $2.93 billion. This decrease significantly is impacted by the extra 6.2% that we had received from the federal government on the public health emergency. It is not the full reason for that. We'll go through a brief reconciliation. However, I just wanted to identify that for you as well. All right. We're going to speak about the enrollment projection. This is one of the key components of our projection, and this is the public health emergency compared to the December 2021 forecast. You can see the green line that decreases beginning in approximately May of 2022, March through May of 2022. That was our projection last year. We had projected that we would grow to about 2.1 million lives and decrease to about 1.8 million lives after the public health emergency ended. However, now we're projecting that it's going to go through April of 2023. Before it ends, we're projecting that we'll be at 2.3 million Hoosiers receiving coverage through the Medicaid program. We are projecting that once the public health emergency ends, that it will take approximately 12 months to unwind the public health emergency enrollment, and that will decrease to just under 2 million lives as shown by the gold line. For a reference point, we have included a dashed line that just shows where we would be if we reverted all the way down to pre-public health emergency enrollment levels of at about 1.5 million enrolled lives. That's just more for illustrative purposes only to understand the delta. We do not expect that we'll return to those levels. So we've had growth of over 780,000 total lives, and we project that those 780,000 will decrease to have a residual growth rate of about 375,000 to 400,000 lives after the public health emergency has been unwound. The next slide highlights some of the populations which have seen the most growth. This actually shows all of our populations. However, you can see that the primary enrollment growth has occurred in two programs. The Healthy Indiana Plan program, both the non-pregnant women and the pregnant women populations are included there, and you can see our enrollment growth that we've had between those two populations of approximately 200,000 lives since January of 2020. In addition to that, our Hoosier HealthWise lives have seen approximately 170,000 life growth, enrollment growth, primarily in the children and CHIP populations. So our net growth, as shown here, is just over 400,000 lives, and that includes just normal growth over this time period, as well as also reflects the unwinding of the public health emergency. We have not seen as much impact in the Hoosier Care Connect program or the LTSS and other fee-for-service programs. The next several slides will take a look at enrollment at greater levels of detail and how that enrollment is anticipated to shift over time. As you can see I'm not going to walk through all of these numbers, but just hit some of the highlights. As you can see, from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2024, we are projecting decreases in our three programs that are highlighted on this page: Healthy Indiana Plan, Hoosier Care Connect, and Hoosier HealthWise. These are average enrollments over these state fiscal years, so we are projecting that that average enrollment will continue to decrease into fiscal year 2025. We have a decrease in the Healthy Indiana Plan, the Hoosier Care Connect, and the Hoosier HealthWise programs. On this slide, you can see the average enrollment growth in the MLTSS program. Again, it starts in the first quarter of calendar year 24, and in fiscal year 25, we expect average enrollment of approximately 130,000 lives. And this also highlights some of the enrollment growth that we have in some of our other programs, and specifically those with no level of care, fee-for-service populations, continued growth in several of those populations, including the Hoosier HealthWise fee-for-service programs. So overall, we are projecting average enrollment decreases of approximately 6% from fiscal year 23 to 24, and an additional 6.7% going into fiscal year 25 to have average enrollment of 1.9 million lives. This is some of the reconciliation for state fiscal year 23. Two of the largest line items that are shown here are capitation rate changes, amendments, and acuity adjustments. So due to the public health emergency, we had not we thought that public health emergency was going to end in January of 23, and some of the lives that would have rolled off would have impacted the acuity of those populations. In fact, they have stayed on eligibility, and so therefore we've had to make some additional adjustments to capitation rates. Much of this dollar impact, as you'll see on the next page, it does not impact the state budget because much of this is for the Healthy Indiana plan, which is matched at 90% or through other funding sources. The enrollment variance due to the maintenance of effort, we are spending an additional $2.2 billion in state fiscal year funds in 2023 due to the maintenance of effort. But when we take a look here on the next slide, what we'll look at here is this is in the appropriation need. So you can see that in this situation, the capitation changes have a much smaller impact, again, because most of that is paid for either through other funding sources, such as additional federal funds, or through the Healthy Indiana plan funding sources. We have an increase in managed care enrollment of $200 million. But down below, you can identify $540 million of additional federal funding due to the extension of the 6.2% through all of state fiscal year 2023. We also have a deferral of hospital assessment fee and HIP collections of about $229 million that is also reducing our fiscal impact, and that's more of a cash timing basis. This is a one-time cash timing issue that reduces our state fiscal year 23 budget forecast. So looking at 2023 through 2024, we recognize that there's an increase in appropriation from need of moving from $2.3 billion down to the bottom page of $3.5 billion from 2023 through 2024. The two timing issues, as I just mentioned, $229 million from the hospital assessment fee and Healthy Indiana plan. We will not have those additional funding sources in fiscal year 24, so that was a one-time adjustment that needs to be reconciled for state fiscal year 24, as well as will not be receiving the additional 6.2% or $540 million. The next line item, the Part D clawback, will also increase in state fiscal year 24 because our federal match rate is increasing. We're losing that 6%. So that loss of the 6.2% impacts our calculation of the Part D clawback payment. So we will be paying in full state share dollars an additional $65 million in Part D clawback payments in fiscal year 24 that we did not pay in fiscal year 23 due to the 6.2%. There are several other items here. The nursing home expenditures, we're seeing a fairly sizable increase of 5.8% on cost, as well as we're starting to see a 3.2% enrollment growth increase in nursing homes. We are projecting that nursing homes will continue to increase in enrollment, moving back to closer to the levels that we had observed prior to the public health emergency. So that continues to grow into fiscal year 24. And then in the community LTSS, or the home and community-based waiver programs, we're projecting nearly a 13% enrollment growth in that program as well. And then finally, there's some managed care payments that will also impact us in fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24. Items that are included in the fiscal year 24-25 base. These are shown on an appropriation needs basis. As Allison mentioned, we have been doing a lot of rate work in various aspects. The first thing is with regard to what's referred to as HIP equalization, which is equalizing provider reimbursement between the HIP program and the Medicaid program. That will have a fiscal impact to move the current physician provider reimbursement to approximately 82 to 83% of the Medicare fee schedule. So some of our Medicaid programs today are below 80%. The Healthy Indiana plan is at 100% of the Medicare fee schedule. So we're equalizing those two programs to be about, they'll now pay in aggregate approximately 82 or 83% of the Medicare program, but will pay an equal amount under both Medicaid and Healthy Indiana plan. The MLTSS program, this is a little bit of a payment timing issue in moving to a managed care program, which is adjust some of the payment timing between a cash fee-for-service basis to a capitation or premium rate basis under MLTSS. So we are projecting some impact there. We do have offsetting savings in the program, and those will accrue over the next several years to illustrate savings in the MLTSS program. Senate Bill 1, we are projecting additional bursts in the Medicaid program. And under Senate Bill 1, we are projecting that this will increase over time in 24 and 25 with more bursts. We're also, under the Medicaid program, projecting how many children will stay on beyond age 1 because a portion of newborn babies do stay on to age 5. So we are making a projection for that as well. Several other items that are listed here, additional reimbursement, prenatal screening, and various other items. The vaccines is related to the COVID vaccines, so we are projecting an impact in cost for the COVID vaccines to continue on into 24 and 25. Again, this provides a brief reconciliation between the 24 appropriation to the 25 appropriation. Less variation due to the public health emergency having been in 23. So we are, again, projecting some Part D clawback. The primary impacts here, again, on nursing home expenditures, as well as community LTSS growth and enrollment. There are some timing issues with regard to managed care, capitation payments, those are impacting it, as well as the MLTSS, HIP equalization, and several other items. And my final slide here focuses on the CHIP program. One of the things that did happen as part of the public health emergency, children did not move from the Medicaid program to the CHIP eligibility program. And so we've actually had a decrease in enrollment in CHIP because the children stayed under Medicaid, under the Medicaid program, where historically they would have transitioned from Medicaid to CHIP as the family income level changes. In addition to that, our FMAP rates have been changing over the last several years from a high of nearly 100% federal match rate now to projecting to just under 76% in the next biennium. So the FMAP rate is changing, as well as with the unwinding of the PHE, we'll see many more children moving from Medicaid into the CHIP program as redeterminations are made. And so we do have an increase in our projected appropriation need for the CHIP program specifically, up to approximately $60 million in each of the next two state fiscal years in 24 and 25. All right, so that walks through all the highlights, if there are any specific questions.
Yeah, I'm asked a question quite often, so I'm going to ask you so I can answer the question. So once the public health emergency goes away in April, the FMAP goes down. But according to your charts, the enrollment goes down as well. Does that net out, or will there still be a cost shifted over to the state?
Yeah, so the public health emergency will end in April. The 6.2% ends on June 30th. Post June 30th, we will have more lives still on Medicaid that will be redetermined over the next 12-month period of time at the standard FMAP rate. So that decreasing number of lives, it will take 12 months to decrease, even though the public health emergency ends on the 6.2% ends on June 30th. We will, I think I'm answering your question. The federal match rate continues at a standard match rate July 1st, for that 12-month period of time while we're still redetermining those lives.
So there'll still be a cost to the state. It just,
There is an additional cost to those lives that are being redetermined during that 12-month time period. Some will stay on Medicaid, some will no longer qualify for Medicaid because they have not had to be determined for now. By June of next year, it will have been over 3 years. Individuals could have stayed on, and obviously income levels and many other factors change.
and I figure that cost is baked into this. I just wanted you to just explain that piece of it. So I think you answered it though, so thank you. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along that line, so we have increased the rolls about 50% since the pandemic, and we anticipate it going down. It looks like about 25% will lose eligibility of the, about half who've come on the roll, so to speak.
Yes.
Half will lose their rolls, but we'll be above 25% from where we started. So why do you know for certain, because I didn't realize, for certain the pandemic is going to be cleared over in April of 2023?
We do not.
Okay, that's
We
what I
are
thought.
Forecasting yet again. We do relatively confident, but this has happened time and time again.
But many
over the
people
last
thought
3
it was going to
years.
end in
Yep.
January.
Yep.
And is there a 2 or 3 month notice to tell us when it's going to end, such that the FMAP it decreases?
The federal, HHS has said they would give states 60 days notice ahead of ending the PHE.
So we need to hear in February that it's
Right.
ending in April, right?
Right, if we're sticking to what has been, I guess, committed or promised, or that's been the traditional.
So we have extra 780,000 people, maybe only half, 375,000 if your estimations are correct, that we will carry for almost a year because it will take a year to unwind and determine eligibility post, because we've not been able to look at eligibility under the pandemic rules in order to receive the 6.2 increased FMAP, right?
Yeah, so we will start basically immediately looking and doing the redetermination process. So there will be individuals who will be found ineligible to go through the normal process. That number will start to decline, as soon as we hit go. But to your point, it will take 12 months to work through that volume of individuals. So we'll see sort of an incremental step down each month.
Well, so have you considered, it had been my understanding that we weren't allowed to require work requirement as a part of eligibility.
Right.
But I just read that South Carolina received a waiver and they are going to require a work requirement for Medicaid eligibility.
Okay, I hadn't heard that. I'll look into it.
So it would be helpful to our bottom line if those who are eligible, let me turn it around, who are not eligible for Medicaid and yet may be on the rolls for the next year and a half, particularly when in a good year we're not going to be receiving the additional dollars, if we can start enforcing a work requirement sooner. All right, so my next question, well, one has to do with your anticipated number, but also I had a question. I thought I saw there was a waiver that had to do with your rebates on medicine through the PBMs. I thought you had negotiated contracts 2 years ago. Do all the rebates pass through back to the state on our PBMs, or how does that work on our pharmacy contracts?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the state of Indiana participates in the National Drug Rebate Program, so all prescription drugs are submitted through to the National Drug Rebate Program. those rebates are passed back to the states and shared with the federal government at the appropriate FMAP rate.
So whatever our match is, 70-30, 80-20, whatever, 90-10, that's how we share the rebate that we get back with,
That is
back to
correct.
the Fed, so it's an offset.
Yes,
Okay, and we do that across the board.
yes.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, and then my last question has to do with your projections on slide 10 for the 2024-2025 base. I'm just curious, so if I did the math right, you're looking at additional bursts because of Senate Road Act 1 from our special session. So you're anticipating, I'm guessing you're using the numbers, if you do the math right, of 4.6 million, I can assume it's in millions, for what you project to be 8,000 additional bursts. Is that what you're looking at? Is that the number, which comes out to about 6,000 per person, per baby?
We're actually higher cost than that because it's the cost of the delivery, the hospital, and the baby, as well as 12 months of continuous enrollment. In addition to that, once we get into 2025, we do project a portion of them stay on beyond age 1 as well.
So you're assuming that every baby that was projected to have been aborted in the past year, looking at those numbers, was eligible for Medicaid?
So I can walk through how we developed it. We estimated that there were 10,000 abortions in the state of Indiana.
Okay, we had 8,000, but keep going.
We have assumed that that some of those will go out of state to receive.
I just want to get back to the numbers. So we're
Okay.
assuming, go back to 2022, 2021. You're assuming that every mother who walked in and had an abortion is Medicaid eligible, and if they'd not had the abortion, the baby would be on Medicaid. And so keep that thought,
Okay.
because we have the LARC carve-out, which is the long-term acting reversible contraceptives, which we're going to be funding. So you don't calculate that it doesn't look like. And then we have, I assume the increase is donated breast milk because of those new babies. Is that right?
No, I think those are two separate
Okay,
policies.
all right. And then former foster youth, are the children also included in that number that's increasing? Because we just heard from DCS, numbers are going down in our foster youth, so I'm trying to figure out. They have nothing to do with
Those are
that.
separate policy items.
Yeah, so we do assume that only half the babies will be Medicaid eligible. The state of Indiana pays, on the Medicaid program pays for about half the babies. So we are projecting about 2,300 babies will be born in the state of Indiana, additional babies, and that's part of our values that are shown here. We have about $10,000 in the cost of the birth, prenatal care, and postpartum care, and then a first-year cost of about $12,000 prior to age 1.
Okay, I'd love to know, you can tell me offline how you figured that out.
Okay.
Because it'll be interesting, since you brought this to us today, going through the requests from different agencies yesterday, I did not see any requests for more wraparound services in any of the agencies that brought to us for these anticipated 2,500, 2,300 new children that we're going to be having in Indiana every year. Okay, thank you.
Senator Fedora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. On the same slide, looking at the HIP equalization, if you are to reduce benefits for those who are currently at the 100% to equalize it with those who are paid less than the Medicare rate, so that they are around the 82 to 83%. Two questions. First, how many lives will be impacted by the reduction from the 100% under HIP to go to the 82nd or 82%, 83%? And what type of benefits will be reduced as a result of that reduction?
So I'll take a stab at answering. This is, in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, we are talking about payment rates to the providers, not a benefit of a member. So if we consider it the idea that we are required by the federal government to equalize rates across programs, and we've talked about, maintain aggregate spend the same, bringing Hoosier Care Connect, Hoosier HealthWise, fee-for-service up from the mid-70s of the Medicare fee schedule to around 82%, bringing HIP rates down to that equal level. This is a compliance exercise, right? The feds have told us you've got to do this by 1/1/24. So this is what you're seeing in this forecast, that particular equalization. No direct impact on benefit. It is a function of rate and payment to provider. Of course, we're going to monitor access, right? Because what will a change in the reimbursement rates do for providers willing to to take on Medicaid? And that's why we are involved in an extensive public comment process with our providers to understand, what is this impact? What does this look like? Because it really depends on the provider's patient mix. So a provider could have 4 visits come in a row, one person, the visit is a 30-minute office visit. Patient 1 is fee-for-service, that rate is $124. Next person comes in, they are MCEA, and they're in Hoosier Care Connect. That rate could be 120, these are real examples, 129. The next person comes in, same 30-minute visit, MCEB in Hoosier Care Connect, they may get 118, so kind of a lower rate. And then the 4th person comes in, and that same 30-minute visit, this happens to be a hip patient, so that provider gets paid at Medicare. So 4 of the same visits, all different rates, negotiated with health plans and otherwise, and then there's the fee-for-service schedule. So in the new environment, all those patients are at the 144 mark. That is that fee schedule, and so there's kind of the one positive is there then becomes less negotiation, and on the administrative side of the provider, it's much more predictable. Now, conversations certainly on that level, and whether that is the number, that's what we're having our public comment process about. But from a compliance perspective, there's an administrative, the equalization there is some administrative ease that goes along with it. Just wanted to kind of mention
I appreciate that. I think I'm all in 100% to support a reduction or savings for the state if benefits are not impacted. But I don't want providers and hospitals to start prioritizing those who might be on the private insurance or they pay more, which would reduce access to the Medicaid population. So my concern is that if I've never seen in my days working for FSSA till today, a provider or a hospital system saying, hey, reduce rates and we'll give you better service or more enhanced access. So I'm skeptical about the reduction. And my second question would be, what would the cost to the state be if we increase the rate so that both programs would be at the 100%? Do we have an estimate for that? So rather than reducing the rates, increasing the rates for both programs so that they can match at the 100%.
Yeah, we do have that. Do you have that off the top of your head?
I do not have that off the top of my head. That is something that we can follow up and share with you.
I appreciate it. I would appreciate it.
We did do, what if we increase everybody to 100%?
Yes.
Level versus this midpoint of 82, 83% of Medicare.
I appreciate that. Again, I'm all for savings if the access and quality doesn't change. But if we don't want to deal with unintended consequences of equalizing both programs. My final question, I know we spoke about home health services and looking at a plan for the whole state. I heard, just to confirm, this model does not project any increase or changes in home health rates, correct?
Yes, so this forecast does not have the investments from our rate methodology work that we have discussed. That is not in this document.
And that will be presented with the governor's budget. Once the plan is completed, we'll have maybe a revised forecast with those numbers included. Is that the plan? Potentially.
It is our intent to present those for the budget, governor's budget, yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we'll be sharing those with stakeholders too, those that were involved in the process. We are doing surveying and engagement now, so they'll be kind of aware of the findings too.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would ask that you get that information to the budget agency so they can distribute it to all the members.
Sure, the cost of increasing to
Yeah,
Medicare.
correct.
Got it.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Next, we have Mr. Jackson. Since we're talking about length of time, how many years have you been doing this?
I've kind of lost track a little bit. Ben and I were talking about that earlier. It's been
Yeah.
several years now. So, yes,
As long as I've been here.
always glad to be back, though. Thank you.
All right, well, the floor is yours.
And having said that, I will talk about one thing right up front in terms of the company name. I was asked to address this. I'm now part of S&P Global Market Intelligence, but I didn't change jobs. Basically, I was with IHS Market, and IHS Market was purchased by S&P Global a few months ago. So just want to clear that up, that it was not, any kind of change in economic provider or anything like that. I'm still the same guy, and I still have the same job. So, and I've been through this enough times before that I don't think that much about it, but I do know that it's important. One other thing that I think I'm legally required to make clear is that I work for S&P Global. I have nothing directly to do with S&P Global Ratings. That's a part of what our company does, but there's basically nothing that I say should be construed as having any particular bearing, do any kind of signaling or anything on any kind of credit ratings. We just have to say that everywhere. I mean, broadly, at least certainly hopefully, and we all should have basically the same thinking of what's going on with the economy, but there's a lot of things that go into those more specific considerations with ratings and that sort of thing that I just don't deal with. So I am asked to say that anytime I speak anywhere. So thanks. But yeah, it's always good to be back. Just want to talk a bit about the broader macro picture. And then, certainly spend plenty of time talking about the state of Indiana. One thing, I'll get out of the way right up front is that, the word recession gets used a lot. It's kind of unfortunate in a way, I guess. Basically, kind of having seen, deliberations and kind of the forecast over the last few months, my broader view is that basically, over the next few quarters, kind of expect, kind of the top line economic growth to be right around zero, give or take. And so, when you start talking about, recession specifically, that, kind of implies that you're below zero. But the way I look at it is that basically if it's give or take, if it's positive by a bit, it's still not where you want it to be, when you're at that level. But also, if it goes a bit negative to where it is officially called a recession, it's not as bad as that term maybe implies. So hopefully that's a good way to kind of get that right out of the way right up front, that it's really been kind of bouncing around, and people spend a lot of time arguing over whether it will be called a recession, what quarter it will start, and that's not what I'm about. And I don't think that's the main point for the state of Indiana in considering budget matters. Again, we've actually revised up our projections a bit. For the next couple of years, but again, still not where we want to be. I think, certainly some starting conditions are a bit better than, some things are going a bit better than, we had been anticipating a couple of months ago. Consumer spending is one of those. Consumer spending is, a very, very large component of the national economy, and especially when you get into periods like this with a lot of inflation, and just coming off some, a lot of things that have really affected the timing of things over the last couple of years. Consumer spending has been tough to get a handle on. Of course, in terms of taxes and things like that, really it's the nominal levels that matter, but ultimately to kind of get at what's going on, kind of those real inflation-adjusted measures matter a good bit. I mentioned there, implied personal savings rate. That can always be tough to get a handle on, but that's certainly one thing, and especially over the last couple of years, it's just been a lot of disconnect between, what incomes have been, especially with, stimulus funds coming in, a disconnect in timing between income and spending levels. So then we start to say, okay, so where is some of this money going? Where is it not going? When will it be spent if it hasn't been spent? And so at least in some areas, that's getting down to where there's not the reserves to draw upon. Inflation certainly has been a very big topic. We do see inflation starting to ease, and I have a great slide I'll get to here in a couple of seconds, so I don't want to talk about it too much right now. It's problematic. It's above where the Fed wants to be. We do at least see it heading in the direction that, we're trying to get it headed in, kind of hitting the things that can be affected. Payroll gains have really been a big one, and that's, kind of an odd situation where, what looks like good news can get construed as bad news. In terms of inflation in particular, that, oh no, all these people have these jobs, so that means they're going to have money to spend, and push up inflation. But that's kind of where, it's not really all that unusual to be in that situation where, good news can be construed as bad news and vice versa. But payroll gains have been above expectations. So, with the, with what goes along with that, but I will say that, we do expect that to slow down soon, and I'll show that. Of course, higher interest rates, have affected, really the housing market more than anything else. We'll get to that. A couple of factors, just really in terms of kind of moderating, whether we have a recession or not. A couple of reasons that we think that it wouldn't be that bad anyway is one, normally when you have a downturn, one of the first things that goes is car demand and car production. We've certainly seen that in the past, but given the situation that we're coming out of over the last few years with just those shortfalls and still inventories being so low, kind of the average age of autos being pretty high, we still see there being enough demand and really enough effective demand in terms of, people wanting a car and then being able to, make that purchase, that we do see that, holding up better than we normally would expect during a recession. The other is that, state and local government payrolls frequently, during a recession, that can be one of the first things to go, but really in many areas, those payrolls never were rebuilt over the last couple of years, and that's especially true with, local school districts. That's part of what goes into that. So, I think still a lot of potential hiring out there, and we would see that, still being, being out there even during a, slow period. I do apologize here. I just caught this morning, policy assumptions in the December forecast. Good news is they haven't really changed much. This is the December forecast, but it's pretty much, these are kind of broader things. I'll kind of let you take a look at these. I don't think there's anything that needs to be highlighted too much, except maybe the bottom item. The Federal Reserve raised, its target, raised fund rates by 50 basis points yesterday. That's in line with what we were expecting. We were pretty confident of that. So, this is talking a little bit more broadly in terms of where we think they might end up. I think for now, they're probably signaling a little bit, at the high end of that range, into 2023. But again, it's going to depend an awful lot on what they see over the next few months in terms of, inflation indicators, employment indicators, that kind of thing. They still have, a lot of the messages that nothing is set in stone, decisions have not been made in terms of that, but, has a lot of underlying implications. Certainly not going to go through all these numbers. One number that I really want to highlight here is kind of right in the middle of the page for 2023, and that's residential fixed investment. Again, it's right in the middle of the page, that minus 16.3% growth. That is really the big driver when you're talking about that top line number in real GDP growth being so low. That is really where that's ultimately your main culprit. Started to pull things down, particularly in the second half of 2022. But that's a big negative number, and it's a big portion of GDP. So to kind of get an idea of what's going on there, I say that partly just to kind of bring a big number down to kind of smaller smaller considerations that okay, what does this really mean? It's had a big implication, not just for home building, which really had finally just started to come back, but also in terms of home sales. Really just, home sales have just kind of dropped off a cliff. And that's a lot of, that's a lot of economic activity in its own right, just buying and selling, already existing homes and homes that have been built. So I do want to highlight that number very much. Again, don't want to go through the whole thing. Certainly happy to talk about any specific thing, but we see vehicle sales coming back. Again, that's largely a function of production, just vehicles being available. Vehicle sales would have been a lot higher in 2022 if the vehicles had been there, and that's new vehicles. So run through again in terms of indicators, consumer price index, highlight that one, down to 4%, certainly an improvement over, the 8.1% we saw for 2022, and then getting back down into numbers that start with 2, especially, kind of in that low range, which is much more where the Federal Reserve wants to be by 2024, 2025. Of course, these are all still growth rates based, kind of following up those higher numbers. So it's not like, things are going down as much as just, rates of growth. Of course, for specific, for some items, prices will be going down, but you're still talking, prices going up, which we normally expect. Payroll employment growth at the national level, and that's, includes some quarters of some negative growth, and not what we've seen. Again, that's partly kind of on, demand for workers, and again, really just getting back into that full employment situation where there just really aren't the workers out there anyway. It's a supply side thing as well as demand. Another thing I'll underscore briefly or highlight is that CoreLogic house price index that we use. That's been certainly a big issue for 2023. Looking at a 6.7% decline, and that's kind of in the annual average number. But we do expect those results to vary wildly across the country. I think the way I would characterize that is we really expect the state of Indiana to not see as negative home price declines, but that's partly because the state of Indiana didn't quite see those big increases on balance. And again, even looking around specific areas, home prices can be all over the place anyway, depending on, where you're looking, kind of the type of housing that you're looking at. So this is just a very, very broad brush look at things, and I like to point out that, but that's coming off of a couple of big increases. We do feel like, that the financial markets are in a place now where this won't trigger broader problems like we saw, 15 years ago now. So I think that's certainly a big part of our underlying forecast as well, that will cause individual problems, but won't cause, cascading problems that really get difficult to get under control. So that's a bit of, okay, we'll talk about this a bit. I like this illustration. It's getting a little easier to tell the story about declining inflation than it was 2 or 3 months ago. It was a tough sell 2 or 3 months ago. I don't really think that our story has changed too much, but just really looking at the path of, kind of where these inflation numbers have come from. That big spiky gold number there, core goods, that was very much, just kind of low supplies. And a lot of things were happening there. There's so much demand shifted toward goods, partly because so many services weren't available. Recreation services, a lot of different things people weren't doing, so money was being put into goods. And now we see that going down. Supplies are getting better. Used car prices are coming down, that sort of thing. But, we still have now that core services going up and still on its way up. That's due to a few things that I think are worth mentioning. One big one that may not be obvious is that rent is included in services. So, to the extent that, apartment house rents, implied rents, even for people who own their homes, there's a consideration made kind of just of the opportunity cost. So, even if you're not, even if your mortgage payment or whatever is still the same, kind of what's that opportunity cost of that home that you live in, that all went up. And, there's just a lag there that even if prices start to come down, when you have rents, or leases that are on an annual basis or longer, a lot of things get locked in, so there's, just a big, there's a big lag of agreements that were made, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, 2 months ago, that take a while to work their way through kind of those aggregate numbers. So that's a big part. And of course, the other thing is just the price of labor. Wages, and to the extent that services are generally, very labor intensive. So to the extent that, service providers are needing to pay, higher wages to compete for workers, that's another thing that makes that difficult to bring down. So that just kind of shows the path. And then, of course, that blue line or teal or whatever it is I'm dealing with new color scheme as part of the new company too. So, but that just kind of shows where that's coming, is that there are lags in there. And I think this is something that, certainly the Federal Reserve has to keep in mind, as they're looking at inflation numbers, and at least I think that they have to, take a look at, okay, what can we do something about, with higher interest rates, and what, is not going to change in the short run, no matter what we do. So, that's definitely part of their challenge, and part of their job is figuring out what portion of this they can really affect, especially in the short run. So I think that's a big one, just because it's such a big issue and it's been out there for so long that I did want to touch on that a bit. In terms of the state of Indiana, certainly Indiana recovered pretty well from the pandemic level. Things going on still, kind of talking about these disruptions a little bit, but, was well ahead of the national average. Since then, gains have been more gradual, particularly in terms of payrolls, and that's partly just other states just have had longer to catch up. I'll say that really nationally and within the state of Indiana, still labor force, is an issue. Even with, kind of lower employment levels than we've seen before, or, not a lot higher. It's an issue everywhere. Again, auto manufacturers have just been working through a lot, kind of a lot of short-term closures over the last couple of years. I think, state of Indiana, the specific vehicles, at times that the state has happened to build in large quantities have been some that have really been prioritized by automakers and have been able to kind of keep moving. But, they've certainly had their own challenges as well. But, have been relatively fortunate there. home building, really ramped up to some of the highest levels again. It just, home building never really came back fully from the, from the downturn in 2008, 2009. Just never really came back until recently. But certainly in the short run, especially the changes in the interest rates and really mortgage interest rates, mortgage increases got ahead of, kind of the Federal Reserve rate increases. That's partly just because of what longer term rates were doing, probably just anticipatory. So that differential is coming down a bit, which is helping. I think, mortgage rates have actually come back a bit. I don't think we necessarily expect a lot more improvement on that. And then, as we get into the next year or two, I think we do see some activity coming back, largely because there is the demand out there. We see some of the inflation affecting construction materials coming down a bit. Labor's been tough in construction for 15 years now. So, but at least to get that to the point where, you can get back to getting comfortable getting some things done. Again, sales of existing homes, a lot of the problem there is that, basically mortgages aren't portable, right? If I have a home, financed at, 3.5%, 4% or whatever, and then turn around and basically kind of give up that mortgage and go to finance another purchase. One way or the other, I think a lot of people are just kind of feeling a little bit stuck where they are right now. And ultimately that has implications for the labor market as well. And it's been a problem that, we say, well, why don't we have the people where the jobs are? And it's partly, well, you need to be able to afford a place. What are you giving up? If you need to sell a home and, buy one somewhere else, if you need to move, that kind of thing. It's not always as obvious as it used to be. And this is not a new issue, but it's not going away, and at least in the short term, probably is a bit more acute. But, again, we see some things, some of these being fairly short term, that the things will start to give, as we get into 2023. So again, I've already said that, home prices, we do expect to decline a bit, not nearly to the level of, in some of the areas that have been really hot, a lot of areas in the South, places like, Boise, Idaho is getting mentioned a lot as a place that was really popular over the last couple of years. So certainly nothing like that. But, certainly a lot of big projects, a lot of new things, particularly in things like, some of the electric vehicle things, semiconductor plants, that kind of thing. We do look at some of that as things that, as the economy does change, are those industries, coming into the state and, helping to build momentum moving forward. And, some of that won't come online in the next 2 years, but at least you start to see some building activity, and some economic activity from that in the shorter term. So again, I'm certainly not going to go through all these numbers. Payroll employment, we do expect, again, that's very similar to what's going on with the national level. Again, that's partly just as we get into 2023, it's partly some employers just saying, okay, well, we've kind of done all that we can do. Some industries needing to cut back, as their business cuts back, or, just kind of rationalize their, do more with less, that kind of thing. And it also starts to get to be a labor supply issue that, are there the people there to hire for potentially available jobs? But, that's certainly a top line number. But along with that and, in keeping with those, labor supply issues, we still see wage income, increasing solidly, certainly not what we've seen over the last couple of years, just in terms of, kind of those average wages. And part of that is composition of, just what types of jobs are out there. If you look at the jobs, and I'll show it in a minute, some of the types of jobs that have gone away and not come back, it depends on, kind of the relative wage rates of those jobs too that can impact the top line number. Personal income, has been kind of yo-yoed a little bit by some of the stimulus money. That becomes less of kind of an annual variability factor over the next couple of years. Part of what brought it down in 2022, despite some really high levels of wage income, was a lot lower. Stimulus support, that sort of thing. So again, I'll just kind of leave that out there, and we can talk about whatever you like. Yeah, this one I want to talk about just for a minute. Again, this is kind of a broader view. This may well be the last time I show this type of graph, and we can kind of get away from it, but just kind of a bit of a comparison to where we were in February 2020, right before the pandemic and all those disruptions, to just kind of show that, and again, this just shows how you really have to kind of get into details of things a bit, that overall, the state is up around, on a seasonally adjusted basis, up around 34,000 jobs relative to, 2.5 years ago. But you start getting into industries and it starts to look a lot different. Transportation and warehousing really took off, with just different ways of shopping, goods being moved, that kind of thing. Not every place enjoyed this to this extent. Just about every place gained transportation and warehousing jobs, but that certainly is one that really took off. At the other end, leisure and hospitality, hasn't fully come back. A lot of places were shut for a good while. A lot of businesses closed. I will point out, as I say that one thing that you have to remember, I think, in terms of some of these jobs, is that in some cases, if you have people, if you have a person who works 2 or 3 different jobs part-time, say you work at 2 or 3 different restaurants, 2 or 3 different stores, something like that, in terms of payroll employment, that'll count 3 times. So keep that in mind as you look at some of these sectors. They're not full-time equivalents. So in some cases, you're talking about where maybe you did have 4 people each working 10 hours a week, and now you have 2 people working 20 hours a week. So that's going to look like a 50%, if you just look at payroll numbers, it's going to look like a 50% decline in payroll, but that can be misleading. And that's why really we've been talking about wage numbers, particularly in terms of, kind of annual total wages for a year. That's why we've been talking more about that, because, if you look at that will offset some of those payroll effects. So I just point that out. It's one of these things where we look at top line numbers and don't always understand what's going on, but still, that still is a real loss in activity. Government, that still is a big sector where, maybe you folks can speak better than I, but, I know that we have some indications that, there's plenty of open jobs, but really just a challenge to compete with, what the private sector is offering in some cases. We do see that still having room to come back over the next couple of years to some extent. Healthcare and social services is, the last one here that I'll really point out is certainly hospitals, had a lot of trouble maintaining staffing levels. But in terms of healthcare and social services, a big one is things like nursing homes, daycares, that kind of thing, all goes in there. And one thing, and I think I pointed this out last year, is that if you have staffing issues with nursing homes, daycare centers, that kind of thing, either they went out of business, they can't get the workers, well then, working parents or parents who would like to be working suddenly have more trouble holding a full-time job because they don't have childcare available. So that's one of those where, you can have some interconnection there. So I'll just, point that out as something that, as that is, and that's just very recently in a lot of areas, that's really been improving, so that, could be signaling, an easing of those issues. So that's one I've been liking to highlight for a while now. Really won't spend much time on this. Again, it just kind of shows, kind of what I mentioned, that average annual wages, kind of the line still holds, fairly fairly constantly, certainly at positive levels, had a big gyration in 2020, whereas, the payroll employment levels. So to a large extent, in terms of payroll employment growth, we're kind of back to what we were looking at in 2017, 2018, where we were, looking much more at a full employment economy. I think it's a little tougher right now to think of it as a full employment economy, but in terms of kind of where the numbers are and where things are, that's kind of where we're left. Again, just throw this out very briefly in terms of job openings. Again, this one just in terms of an indicator of a hot labor market. I don't really show a forecast. This is all just BLS numbers of history that we've seen, but job openings had been at just at least relative to history, just extremely high levels. That's starting to back off some now. It's partly because the hires rate has been pretty good. Labor force participation, there's several reasons for this. Again, I've shown this before. A lot of these factors have been. I start this graph in 1980, partly just to really show the long-term trend here that some of this is not recent, but certainly that big spike downward that we saw in 2020, and to just not see that coming back. There's a few things going on there. Certainly folks in the kind of that 55 to 65, 55 to 70 age range, labor force participation has dropped among those. A lot of folks retired. A lot of times what we would see in the past is folks who, would retire, especially if they already qualified for a pension or something like that. They would go ahead and retire from a job, but then turn around and get some kind of other job. And I think we're seeing less of that. We're seeing plenty of indications that we're seeing less of that than we were seeing in the past, whether, people just don't want to, or whether they feel like they can afford it and they don't need to. Kind of back to an earlier point, I think, there is plenty of cases where you have people in that range who basically are spending a lot of time providing either care for their parents or for their grandchildren. And, there's always been some of that, but I think, certainly a big issue now that is keeping people basically just out of the labor force. And that's kind of the question we have to get at is, what's keeping people out of the labor force? That's a big one. Again, skills mismatch, maybe people having more difficulty moving to where jobs are because of affordability issues, just a lot going on there. So again, nothing new, but just want to address that we do see that coming back some, but not completely. Auto industry, again, just show this is a big number to show for the state of Indiana in terms of, those production shortfalls that we saw, of course, still that big change in composition between cars and light trucks. We do see that kind of leveling off in terms of that differential, I guess. I think fuel prices probably have something to do with that. But, still, again, especially, coming into a period of potentially kind of a slow economy, it's not too bad to see those numbers hanging in the way they are. Home building, I've shown this one before, and I really, raised the point earlier about, rent inflation, housing price inflation, all that kind of stuff. To me, to some extent, that goes back to some of what we see here, especially in 2012, 14, 16, where we really just didn't see that rate of home building come back. We probably didn't want to get back to where we were in the early 2000s. But, it just really took a long-term time to come back. This is a big economic driver. And, finally was getting back there in 2021 and into 2022. But then with the higher interest rates in particular, we see a pretty strong pullback. But then, a leveling off and a resumption of, some pretty good activity. So not necessarily the decline that, certainly not the declines that we saw, 15 years ago. So just wanted to point that out again, kind of one of these big picture issues that we certainly like to keep in mind. Most of this is stuff I've already said, so I'm not going to repeat it all to you. I think, state's economy is still on solid footing, very much impacted by, the things we see going on at the national level. Certainly don't see any particular red flags or anything like that. The auto industry, manufacturing, hanging in pretty well, especially in a downturn period is definitely a good thing for the state of Indiana. And again, longer term and even shorter term, I can take out that longer term thing that, like with most places, just having a labor force, that, is available and, qualified and it just able to do the jobs that are available and, that can come down the road is really going to be a big factor moving forward. I think in general, we don't see, opportunities, being any kind of a shortfall situation. It's more just being in position to, to fill those needs and fill those positions. I have a couple other slides I put in afterward, and this one I have to at least give an opportunity. This just kind of shows somehow the forecast has changed. We always put this in, nothing particularly to highlight out of that, but just kind of shows the how thinking has changed over time since we first started talking about this previous budget cycle, I think. So that's basically all that I had that I intended to say. So.
All right, thanks, Tom. I just have one question. So you touched on the recreational vehicle. So, I mean, being from northern Indiana, that's what I always watch for. Because the RV industry, when you talk about a recession, whether it be big or small, it seems like the RV industry is the first to get the hit. And so when you talk to them up there, they're saying how, we've cut back overtime, we've cut back hours, some have gone down to 4-day work weeks, extended vacation, holiday time. Mm-hmm. So as we look at the RV industry slowing down, would that not be a red flag that our economy will see that as well? Maybe not as big of a dip nearly as 2008, but don't you think we'll see a small dip and maybe a faster recovery? Mm-hmm. But I think that's telling me we're going to have some kind of dip in front of us.
Yeah, I think the RV industry, is interesting, and I think that one, kind of helps, show some of the challenges, kind of the specifics of that industry, even kind of outside of issues of kind of a downturn, is that that market got so hot in 2021 or so that and that's one that I would love to know, be more of an expert in that industry. I do try to follow that industry, but certainly just for factors of people not wanting to fly, not wanting to stay in hotels, that kind of thing. Certainly the RV industry, they were just doubling previous production records for a while. So I think part of it was that we had to expect some downturn from that. Some pullback, that just wasn't going to be sustainable. But yeah, certainly the issue moving forward, is where does it go from here? Kind of where does it level off? I think that, I read recently that shipments had, about half of what they were a year ago, but that still leaves them kind of in a top 5 scenario. So yeah, certainly where it goes from here, that industry is in a little bit of a unique situation, although it kind of illustrates, what we see in some other spots, particularly in terms of goods producing industry. Yeah, in general, that a lot of industries kind of had that same story, not quite to the extent that RVs and of course, RVs have such a concentration in Indiana. But yeah, certainly, there's going to be certain segments of durable goods in particular that, are going to be challenged both by, any kind of a downturn, but just because, things weren't going to stay where they were over the last couple of years anyway. just because of some of the broader situation going on, people were spending more on durable goods than they otherwise would have, whether it's household items, that kind of thing. But yeah, certainly some segments, especially the RV industry, we would see as being problematic. At the same time, we still see a lot of the service industries really still in very much in recovery mode, both in terms of, rebuilding their businesses in some cases and demand really fully coming back. So yeah, it's definitely, it's always the case, but I think especially right now, it's there's just a lot of different things going on in different industries, yeah.
Questions? Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just got two or three primary questions. Rent inflation, we talked about that. You talked about that a little bit. I've seen several reports where some foreign entities are buying a lot of properties around the country, homes as well as apartment complexes, and starting to see an increase in spike in the rents. Are there examples of what some other states may have done to kind of control that, or if you're aware of some of those reports?
Yeah, I've seen some of those reports in various forms. In terms of specific policies, I can't speak to that too much. One thing I will say, again, this is, everything with housing is, gets to be difficult to talk about, because it is so local. I have seen some reports actually that in certain markets that rents are actually coming down, not only that rates of inflation, but again, that's, coming down a bit off some very big increases. But, probably the main thing I can say right now is that we do see, some leveling off, kind of getting that under control. But again, probably the bigger impact, is just that there is that lagged effect. And still, ultimately the supply problem, at least to me, goes back to that home building chart that I showed, and really staying so subdued for so many years.
Thank you. In terms of folks going back into the workforce, you mentioned that. Do you see any trends of more folks getting into the gig economy, those more remote jobs, those service-based, but might be more short-term?
Yeah, certainly we have seen a lot of that over the last couple of years. I think to some extent, at least in some of the underlying numbers, it's hard. I don't think we're real sure how reliable some of the statistics are, but certainly remote work, like I work remotely now, really wasn't by my choice. We had a fairly small office in the Philadelphia area, and the company just chose to give it up, so I don't have any place to go if I wanted to. And of course, but that's, one kind of small example. But, my work is the type that lends itself to remote work. And, you have things, when you're part of a global company, it probably doesn't matter that much anyway. But, certainly the gig economy, we've seen a lot of that. I think, certainly most of the increase that we would see in that, we've already seen, but it still may level off. I still think a lot of these things haven't worked themselves out, but there's certainly been plenty of that. And some of that will show up in the payroll numbers, and some will not.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, to your point about the leisure, the hospitality sector, I know a lot of companies have yet to fully go on the conferences and the trade shows and things like that. So I'm sure that's probably playing a part in that. Last question I have, in terms of, I'm looking at the Indiana payrolls slide 9, I believe. It talks about the transportation and warehousing. Is train freight also included in that, in terms of the
I'm sorry, what?
Freight, in terms of the freight traffic? I see the upward or the positive trend
Yes.
in transportation and warehousing.
Yes.
Just curious, what all does that include?
Oh, that's,
That's everything.
planes, trains, automobiles,
Gotcha.
And again, the warehousing component, distribution centers, that kind of thing. That one can get a little bit tough, in terms of knowing which sector some of these jobs will get put into, because, these warehouses, they may be owned by, a big retail company, so, can ultimately be a company that does retail, but if that's what they're doing is warehousing, then that site will be counted as that. And even, airports, certainly a lot of airports, cut back staffing, airlines, that can get, another
Right.
curveball that can get thrown in there is with some of these things that if they're going through kind of staffing services, outsourcing things, that can show up in other categories. But yeah, it's freight, it's moving people. Yeah. It's a lot of
I just thought it was interesting because we know there's somewhat still of a supply chain issue, but still we're seeing growth in these sectors. So it's like,
Yeah, that's one where, but well, again, yes, a lot of it's a scramble to, really just get things where they're going as fast as possible, and you really kind of, I, was telling somebody that I was, took my mom, shopping for shoes in Richmond a while back, and, it's like, well, we have this shoe that would be really great for you, but we haven't been able to get it. It's probably sitting on a ship off of the LA or somewhere. So, but I think some of those issues are easing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Representative Cherry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm surprised the energy hasn't been a bigger factor with this, because we're approaching the winter season. I know gasoline price at the pump is lowest it's been in a while, but diesel fuel is still up there, and that's a lot of our larger pickup trucks and semis and RV vehicles are tied to diesel fuel, and then home heating oil and propane and natural gas. I've had a lot of constituents saying they're paying almost twice what they've been paying, and that's going to, and we're just approaching the winter. This weekend's supposed to be a cold spell, and I just wondered, energy wasn't really a factor in.
Energy has been a very tough one, and I think very tough to figure. It's certainly been a variable factor. I think, part of it was we had such a run up back in the spring, with the start of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And I think, part of the problem with that is that's another case where, you kind of have aggregate supply and demand, but then you have more specific, okay, do you have what you need, where you need it, kind of in the form that you need it, certainly with diesel and that kind of thing. A lot of that is refining where, we've been exporting some. I know that we hadn't normally been doing. So yeah, it varies, but I think certainly the kind of the pulling down in gasoline prices has, in terms of that top line number, it is that fall in gasoline prices that is pulling down that kind of top line number. But yeah, it's still an issue. Yes.
Well, diesel fuel's still like at $5.24, $5.42 a gallon.
Yeah.
And that's a big impact on transportation costs for us to get goods.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, from local trash, they want to double their rate for trash pickup. And those things are adding on, and they're a little bit, but they all add up to the cost what goes out of a person's paycheck.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good point. That helps, kind of illustrate the point about, especially inflation in services, not having topped out, that, so much of that, to the extent that they're able, providers will pass along that. So yeah, things, services like, trash pickup, transportation, other, anything, just about everything has transportation built in somewhere. That a lot of those price increases, still being passed along. So that's still going to, cause that hump to take longer to get over in terms of that aspect of inflation. Yes. Yeah, things can get kind of hidden and shifted around in the numbers. Yes.
Senator Cadora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. The first, on both of them are on slide 15, the bottom line for Indiana. One of the strongest statements that I took away from this presentation is that last subsection of the bullet points, longer-term issues remain the same. And you implicitly talk about education, but not explicitly, where you say that we need to continue to grow in size and skill level to allow existing businesses to expand. Last 5 years, between 15 and 2020, Indiana experienced a decline of 12% of high school graduates, and then enrollment in universities dropped. Where does education fall in this model of looking at where Indiana needs to be to recover and continue to grow and expand its economic sector? So, 3,000 or 2,500 plus teacher shortage, declining graduates from high schools, brain drain problem, and that's under that longer term issues remain the same. Any thoughts on education?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of some of the enrollment numbers, I've seen those. Of course, then the first question I ask is, where are they going? What are they doing instead? In some cases, I know trade schools, which is a very, very appropriate, option, for many, in terms of both, personal interest and then just what is needed. So I think there is a consideration there about what's needed. But certainly the, broader things, it just no matter what you do, you need a good, basic education, right? So, certainly something that we're seeing as an issue everywhere. I don't have, kind of particularly, policy prescriptions or anything like that. But yeah, it's just more throwing out, just kind of throwing out potential risks and issues that remain pretty much everywhere, really. But that's, I probably can't talk
I
too
appreciate
much
it.
to that specifically. But yeah, certainly an issue, and education takes all kind of different forms, whether it's, more targeted workforce training for certain roles. In many cases, that's just been hard to find too.
I appreciate you. I agree with you. I personally believe that the most powerful tool on earth to lift up individuals, families, and economies is education. That's just my personal belief. The second and final point, on the same slide, last bullet point, the need to provide care for family members, children, and seniors remain an impediment to workforce return. Why would an economist be talking about issues that historically have been considered social issues, childcare and taking care of families and seniors?
For me, yeah, I try not to get that so much into, kind of any policy prescriptions, but it's basically, look, if you need workers, where are they going to come from? And, that's just kind of, I alluded to that earlier with, in terms of just, how employment in some sectors can have a bearing on other sectors. I mean, ultimately it all fits together. And, and maybe there's other ways around it too, but, particularly, and maybe sometimes we do worry too much about, payroll employment numbers and that kind of thing. But, in terms of economic indicators and all that, that's what we look at. So, what are some of the types of things that, can cause this to, and ultimately cause that to not be a limiting factor on the state economy. And that's about all. That's as far as I go with that.
I appreciate you. Again, to conclude on that, I think there was some rhetorical question in my question because I think it was the last budget session when you testified and you brought up the issue of childcare, housing, and other things. And I worked on this issue for 2 years. When we talked to small businesses and large businesses, I think if I recall correctly, the statement from the last budget forecast before the last budget session was that specifically mothers in the state of Indiana declined to re-engage in the workforce because of childcare issues. That was a statement that was made in the past. So as I continue to focus on economic recovery, I think it's important that we as a state, that's more on our side, to focus on these issues that are not necessarily social issues. These are workforce issues. education funding, pre-K, early education, K through 12, universities. It will all connect together in one systematic, strategic way to truly take our state to the next level. I appreciate your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. As always, it's very thorough. I just wanted to follow up and make sure I understand, when you talk about childcare, though, it seems that we know that our schools are, in a sense, a place where many of our children go, besides education during the day, such that their parents are able to go to work. And with the last 2 years of the pandemic and school closures, many of our working parents were not able to go to work, even if they were working remotely, because their children were not in school. Do you factor that in as well? And knowing with the quiet resignation, maybe some of those parents realized with the disruption in their home life that it was easier to stay home. Did you calculate that at all?
Yeah, certainly, we try to consider all these things. Ultimately, we're kind of just going by, what the statistics are that we're giving, or, that we're given, kind of why are things where they are, where might things be able to go from here. But yeah, that's certainly something that, we were looking at it. And I think at that point, certainly a year and a half ago, we were expecting to improve, just, with anything with school, schools being open, more fully, more consistently. So that is something that I think, we expected to improve, and I think has, and probably showed up some in the numbers, where things go from here. There's probably, I think a lot of those issues probably have gone, as far as they're going to go for now, or but there's still room for further gains at the margins.
Right.
And still.
Hopefully we've gone as far.
Yeah, and sometimes it's even just, reopening new businesses. If a business closes, it takes a while for another business to open, or for other businesses to expand to meet that demand, so timing gets to be an issue too.
Right, right. But rightly or wrongly, when our schools are closed, it's not just the meals that they provide, it's the before-school services they provide, it's after-school care. Some of them are now having preschool programs as well. So there are a huge impact. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to have the revenue forecast. So if we could have Hari and Krista.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the State Budget Committee. My name is Krista Ricci. I'm the fiscal analyst for the Senate Republican Caucus, and I'm joined today by Hari Raza Findramanana, Assistant Director of the Tax and Revenue Division of the State Budget Committee, or agency. Now that you've seen the economic forecast by Mr. Jackson, Hari and I are here today to present you with the updated State General Fund forecast for fiscal 2023 and the new forecast for state fiscal year 2024 and 2025. First off, I wanted to give a little background on the revenue process and how the state of Indiana forecasts our revenue. The purpose of the Revenue Technical Committee is to select the statistical equations that will be used to forecast state general fund collections for each tax type. Once the equations are selected, the economic variables provided by S&P Global Market Intelligence, formerly IHS Markit, who you just heard from this morning, are plugged into the equations in order to predict state general fund revenues for this fiscal year and the upcoming biennium. This forecast process is collaborative and has worked very well for the state of Indiana for many years. Most importantly, this is considered a consensus forecast, which means that all of the members of the Revenue Technical Committee all agree that this forecast is our very best effort at projecting state general fund revenues. The Revenue Technical Committee is a 6-member bipartisan committee that contains members of both the legislative and executive branches of government, much like the Budget Committee membership itself. Besides Hari and me, the members of the committee include, and they're up on this slide, Susan Preble, fiscal analyst for the Senate Democrats, Eric Gonzalez, fiscal analyst for the House Democrats, Ben Tooley, fiscal analyst for the House Republicans, and Dr. Dagny Falk from Ball State University, who is the committee's independent economist. The committee has support from Hari's team at the Budget Agency, as well as the Nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency. Many of these individuals are here today, and all of their assistance is essential to this process. I would like to take a moment to thank each of these individuals for their contributions and expertise. They work very hard to ensure that the state of Indiana has the best forecasts and models possible. And I would also like to take a moment and thank the State Budget Committee members for their continued support of the committee's independent, nonpartisan process by which Indiana forecasts general fund tax revenues. Next, I wanted to give a quick overview of the major revenue sources performance year-to-date through November for state fiscal year 2023 as compared to the same period in state fiscal year 2022. As you can see, sales and individual income tax collections for fiscal 2023 through November are trending ahead of the December 2021 forecast in the same period for fiscal 2022. However, corporate income tax revenue collections are trending below the December 2021 forecast in the same period for fiscal 2022. Within this forecast, there are several economic factors that we need to consider as outlined on this slide. Mr. Jackson touched on many of them, and these are the broad economic trends that are driving the outcomes and overall direction of the state's forecast. This slide summarizes each of the major revenue models and variables within those models to achieve the forecast for the largest 3 state general fund revenue sources. For sales tax, we have 2 equations, one for gasoline use tax and another for the remaining sales and use tax. For individual income tax, we look at separate equations for withholdings and estimated payments. And for corporate income tax, we have 1 equation forecasting corporate adjusted gross income. Once again, this slide represents all of the variables used in each equation. And as a reminder, the committee selects the equations. However, the economic data that is ultimately used within those equations to forecast state revenues are provided by S&P Global Market Intelligence, again, formerly IHS Markit. I would like to briefly walk through a couple of changes made to the revenue models by the committee. Regarding the sales tax net of gut model, the current model is a proxy for the tax base and spending on durable goods as well as some taxable services. Overall, this is a similar model as the December 2021 forecast, but in order to better capture spending on taxable purchases that drive most of Indiana's sales tax base, the committee removed prior fiscal year home sales variable and replaced it with 2 variables: estimated taxable Indiana PCE variable as a ratio of all PCE goods and Indiana household net worth per household. Regarding the Indiana individual income tax model, there were no changes made to the withholding model, but within the estimated payments model, in order to better capture business incomes, the change in prior calendar year S&P 500 index was added. The corporate income tax model did not change, and all variables are the same as the December 2021 forecast. This slide contains the major tax policy changes incorporated into this forecast. The revenue models themselves forecast the tax base for each tax type, and then after the tax base is forecast, the actual amount of revenues is adjusted for legislative changes made to tax rates, tax distributions, to the general fund, and other tax policy changes made by the General Assembly. The out-of-tax policy changes incorporated into this forecast include the ongoing FIT rate reduction, the gasoline use tax distribution change, through which the state general fund portion continues to decline until it's 0% in fiscal 2025 and each year thereafter, sales tax from remote sellers, and the individual income tax rate reductions passed by House Bill 1002 during the 2022 regular session. This slide highlights some of the additional out-of-model adjustments that were needed in order to ensure that the forecast was accurate by incorporating revenues that are not captured within the model equations themselves or the historical data sets. These include a one-time adjustment for better than expected local income tax revenues in 2022, the marketplace facilitators legislation and Wayfair Supreme Court decision, the repeal of the utility receipts tax beginning July 1st of 2022 as passed by House Bill 1002 during the 2022 regular session, and gaming dynamics including sports wagering, which started in fiscal 2020. And then the committee also wanted to highlight the economic trend within salaries and wages that's driving the economic forecast. For example, Indiana salary and wages are projected to increase in 23, 24, and 25. But in terms of growth rate over prior year, the growth in 2023 is estimated to be lower than it was in 2022, but both years are estimated to grow over the prior year. Growth in 2024 as well as 2025 are estimated to see year-over-year growth more in line and above historic levels. Now, for the moment everyone's been waiting for, I'm going to go over the major revenues by type. For sales tax, fiscal 2023 is estimated to grow $491.9 million or 4.9% over 2022, and the December 2022 forecast is adding $542.6 million or 5.5% compared to the December 2021 forecast. For fiscal 24, the forecast is estimated to grow $148.8 million or 1.4% over 2023, and for fiscal 25 is estimated to grow $451.7 million or 4.2% over fiscal 24. For individual income tax, the 2023 forecast is estimated to be $749.7 million or 9.2% less than 2022. And the December forecast is about $147.4 million or 1.9% lower than the December 2021 forecast. And for 2024, the forecast is estimated to grow $319 million or 4.3% over 23, and for 25 is estimated to grow $196.9 million or 2.5% over 24. For corporate income tax for fiscal 2023, the forecast is estimated to be $415.1 million or 27% less than 2022, and the December 2022 forecast is about $157.3 million or 12.3% lower than the 2021 forecast. For 2024, the forecast is estimated to grow $57.4 million or 51% over fiscal 2023, and the 2025 is estimated to be $7.5 million or 0.6% less than 2024. And then for gaming taxes for fiscal 2024, the forecast is estimated to be $16.8 million or 3.7% more than 2022. And the December forecast is about $11.6 million or 2.5% higher than the December 2021 forecast. For 24, the forecast is estimated to be $31 million more than 2023 and $200,000 less than 2024. For all other taxes and revenues in fiscal 2023, the forecast is estimated to be $112.7 million or 11% more than 2022. For fiscal 24, the forecast is estimated to be $134.2 million or 11.8% higher than 23, and for 25 is estimated to be $25.1 million or 2% less than 24. So in total, state general fund tax collections in fiscal 2023 are estimated to be $543.5 million or 2.6% less than 2022, and the December 2022 forecast is about $367.6 million or 1.8% higher than the December 2021 forecast. For fiscal 24, the forecast is estimated to be $628.4 million or 3% higher than fiscal 24. And fiscal 2025 is estimated to be $615.8 million or 2.9% higher than fiscal 2024. And then here's the chart that everyone's used to seeing. This is the compilation of numbers I just went through. And then the committee also wanted to highlight the historical perspective of the three largest state general fund revenues in order to demonstrate that revenue trends for this forecast should be interpreted within historical perspectives. So for individual income tax, collections for fiscal 2022 saw unprecedented temporary stimulus that pushed revenues for the individual income tax well above historical levels. And fiscal 2023 is projected to see a drop in revenues closer to historic revenue growth trends and above fiscal 21 levels. Growth in 2024 as well as 2025 are estimated to see year-over-year growth more in line with and above historic levels. For sales tax, while collections year-over-year for 2023, 24, and 25 are estimated to grow, it's noteworthy that there was an elevated growth rate in 2022. And then for corporate income tax, trends for 2022 saw, again, unprecedented growth due to stimulus effects, and fiscal 23 is projected to see a drop in the growth rate, but still be above fiscal 21 levels and are estimated to remain higher than historic levels for 2024 and 2025. Finally, I just wanted to mention that for the viewing public and people here, that all these documents will be on the budget agency website. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Hari and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee? Director Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and not a question, but just a clarification. I'm not sure why they're not up there yet, but yeah, those documents should be loaded on the budget agency website any moment now. In addition to the information that you've provided here, we also have an updated surplus statement that will be there. And again, just as soon as this gets posted, I did send out the surplus statements to the fiscal analysts at about 10 this morning. So,
Questions? Senator Cador.
Just one question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did this forecast incorporate the latest automatic tax refund? When you talk about the
individual
enacted,
income tax,
yeah, when you talk about the enacted legislation, so anything that passed through the special session, was that captured?
So fiscal year to date, we received about $60 million that's been intercepted for obligations that either were applied to debt owed or outstanding tax liability. The outstanding tax liability front remains in the general fund. The part attributable to debt owed has been remitted to agencies. And so if you look at the fiscal year to date, difference versus forecast, we're about $120 million above. $60 million of that is expected to be from that specific timing issue, because again, those are outstanding tax liabilities. So if we've seen that a lot of people owe taxes from tax year 21, we have made no adjustments because there's reason to believe that they would have made those payments in April of 2020.
Right. Yeah, any outstanding tax liability is going to continue to be factored as part of our revenues or later in the surplus statement, because these are state dollars owed to the state that were intercepted through the automatic tax pay refund that took place. And that's $60 million is what you mentioned so far. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? Thank you, Krista and Hari. Job well done. So I think now we're going to take a 15-minute recess. So we'll reconvene at 12:15.